Well, I'm joined now by Vic Valentine, manager of Scottish Trans, which aims to improve gender identity and equality. Thanks for being with us. What's your reaction to today's ruling?
I think it's fair to say feeling pretty shocked and disappointed by the ruling today, which has, I would say, fundamentally changed how organisations like mine and the Equality and Human Rights Commission itself, in fact, have understood the law around the Gender Recognition Act to work for the last 20 years.
And can you explain why you say that?
Yeah, so when that law was passed, the purpose of the Act was to provide legal gender recognition to trans men and women as who they truly are, so as men and women in law. And unfortunately, the ruling instead seems to say that now, when it comes to the Equality Act, that recognition is no longer in place.
How will this have an effect in day-to-day life, in your view?
I mean, it's a little bit early to say for sure. It's obviously a long and complex judgment, so I wouldn't want to say anything that turns out not to be accurate. But there's definitely some concerns there that this might limit trans people's access to certain kinds of services and spaces. One reading of the judgment would seem to say that trans people might actually not be able to use either men only or women only services in places like hospital wards that might have single sex wards. That then starts to beg the question of where trans people will be expected to go when we're recovering from illness or surgery.
And how do you think any legal confusion can be clarified if that exists? Because the judge did say that transgender people still have legal protection from discrimination, but they made their findings very clear under the Equality Act.
Yeah, and of course, it's really important that the judges reconfirmed that trans people have protection from discrimination and harassment under the Equality Act. But I think what's really important here is that trans people also have been ruled to have a human right to legal recognition of who we truly are, about our identity and how we live our lives, not about the sex originally recorded on our birth certificate. This judgment seems to cut across that international human rights principle and one that's been in place in UK law for over 20 years.
So, is what you're saying that there are two laws that say sort of contradictory points here?
Basically, I'm just saying that in terms of how the law has been understood to work, in terms of how trans people are recognised, it feels like it's almost been kind of reversed by today's decision. And it will be really important for us to wait and understand and properly unpick all of the implications before we can be totally sure how that translates into day-to-day treatment of trans people by services and employers, for example.
Does it not, in fact, just give clarity that if men and women are decided on biological sex at birth, but trans people are given also legal protection from discrimination, that does give quite clear guidance, doesn't it, to service providers, schools, hospitals, pubs, restaurants, and so on, about what they do in providing daily services for people?
Yeah, so as I said though, one of the kind of readings that you can take from the judgment though is that now single sex services will both men only and women only single sex spaces will be able to exclude trans people. So the judgment says that you could exclude, for example, a trans man who couldn't be included very well in a women only space because he's undergone medical transition treatment that means that women would object to him being in that space. So if I went to a hospital ward tomorrow, for example, to get my appendix out, I wouldn't be legally allowed on the male ward, but I wouldn't be allowed on the female ward because women would object to that. So which ward am I going to go on? We need to be able to answer those kinds of questions.
And in your view, that ruling today that we've had today doesn't say that if you were born, you would go to the ward that you were biologically born under in the first place,
No,
originally under biological sex determination.
no, it seems to say that there are exceptions that allow trans people to be excluded from the wards that match their biological sex if women on that ward would object to it, or men if the reverse situation were the case.
And do you think, therefore, in legal terms, is there anything further that can be done? Because this ruling's come down from the Supreme Court.
Yeah, my understanding is in terms of kind of this case, this is it. It's the end of the road. And I think, as I said, it's quite a complicated ruling that's been come as a big surprise, at least in my organisation. So in terms of thinking about next steps, I know that for me and for my organisation and for trans people, the most important thing for us is we just want to be able to be included in society fairly and equally, and we'll be thinking about how to make sure that that's definitely the case.
Okay, Vic Valentine, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Manager of Scottish Trans.
Thank you.
Now, a Swiss and